非常高兴能够今天在这里进行演讲。刚才也听到了很多很有意思的视频，很有意思的研究。我今天的演讲不好意思，我没有准备中文演讲，所以我今天用英语做发言。希望大家 bear with me，可能夹杂一些中文。So today I am going to talk about my research on passive house. And the title is Do Passive House Need Passive People? And it's an investigation into the low carbon housing in the UK. So, as from an architecture background, going into the research of climate change and energy use, my main focus was in the energy and GHG emission in building sector. So as you can see from the graph I'm showing here, in the UK in 2018, the final consumption by sector in domestic sector, it was the highest energy consumption sector of all, next to the transportation sector. And it's continually growing. And the energy that we consume primarily consists of fossil fuel energy. So coal, oil, gas, they're still the three most consumed energy of all. On top of that, the global greenhouse gas emission by sector that we can see here, as the energy use in buildings has also been one of the biggest consumers or emitters. 17.5% is emitted from building sector. Now, because of that, or on top of that, the climate is already changing. It has been changing for the past 100 years, the past century. So with this changing climate, we not only need to think about how to try to slow it down or reverse, we also need to think about how do we design to suit the future climate. So in the future climate, we will experience temperature change. For instance, we'll have warmer summer, have a higher temperature in the summer, some heat waves, more and more common, even in the UK, if you can believe it. And we will have increased cooling demand because of that. And we also have changes in precipitation patterns, damaged building structure, so we have more rain and wetter winter. And then we'll need increased drainage control for flooding and storm, together with rise of the sea level, and increased flooding risk and relocation of coastal towns. As you might have heard lots of other presentation in this conference already about the resilient city. We also have increased air pollution, especially indoor air pollution. It can be as 4 times or 10 times as much as outdoor air pollution. So we have an increased need for ventilation inside our buildings. So this is my starting point from architecture perspective. And I studied passive house, which is a green architecture or sustainable building standard that purely is based on energy consumption in the building. So the pictures you can see here, the first one is a infrared camera picture, shows you a terraced house in the UK. It's very common terraced house. An infrared camera will show you how much heat an object emits. So in this row of the house, you can see every house, apart from the middle one, leaks huge amount of heat through the building fabric. And that's a huge problem. And the middle one, which has been retrofitted into a passive house standard, you can see that the heat preserved within the building. Passive house or 被动房, it has been spread into China, and there has start to have some new projects in China. For instance, the 青岛生态田园被动房技术中心, it's an example of passive house going into the Chinese market, but we're yet to see a massive kind of growth in especially residential buildings, which was what it was designed for. What is passive house then? So passive house buildings, they are designed to meet a standard set by the German Passive House Institute. So it was designed or developed in Germany. So Germany's climate, I'd say it's quite similar to the Chinese northern northern region. It's a continental climate. You have cold winter and a hot summer. The standard ensures the building to use ultra low energy for space heating and cooling without compromising the occupant's comfort. And it says it uses 90% less energy than a conventional household. So that's a massive reduction. And the energy demand for passive house standards, you don't need, there's no design kind of criteria or certain design rules for passive house. There's only energy demand. So if a house can use energy less than 120 kilowatt hour per square meter per year, you can apply to be a passive house. So it's mainly focused on energy consumption. And in order to achieve that energy consumption goal, we need to have certain design features or design strategies. And one of the main design strategy is focused on the skin of the house, or what we call a fabric first approach. So we conserve energy first before we use more energy. So the fabric first approach, as you can see here, there's some standard detailing of passive house buildings. So in this standard detailing, we have a huge amount of insulation in the walls. And most time we use triple glazed windows instead of single glazed or double glazed windows to prevent any thermal bridge. We also have an air tightness level that's never been achieved in any other type of buildings. So we basically seal every inch of the fabric, building fabric, using tape. We make sure that everything is sealed so that no heat can be leaked from within the premises. Now, on top of that, passive house also uses a very different heating, ventilation, and hot water system. So it uses an integrated heating and ventilation system called mechanical heating and ventilation recovery system. So this system recycles the heat generated inside the house, so from our body heat, from electrical appliances, from our cooking, everything that emits heat. We recycle this with the incoming fresh air from the outside. And those heat will be recycled, and then the fresh air will be supplied inside the house. So it's an integrated heating and ventilation system. But the problem with this is it's very different from a traditional heating system where you have a radiator or underfloor heating, or you have an electric heater where you can just press buttons. Especially in here, we have a thermostat, 温度控制, indoors. So you can press buttons to set, if you want 23 degree, you set 23 degree, and then the heating will come on and will bring the temperature up. It's not like that. The only control panel you have in passive house is like the control panel here. You can control the fan speed. It's almost like a big fan. That's the only thing you can control. Now, sometimes just to recycle heat is not enough. So most of the time, residents or occupants will have supplementary heating systems, such as using a wood burning stove, like the picture in the middle, or underfloor heating in some rooms. And that underfloor heating might be supplied by a PV panel, 太阳能板, generate renewable energy. And most of the time, they will also have a solar thermal generator to, harvest solar energy to heat the hot water. 太阳能热水系统, like most of us have in China. So those are the supplementary systems to the MVHR system. Now, when I go into study passive house, there are some questions I want to understand. So it seems like a very good building standard, a very good energy standard, but why it hasn't been used as in a massive scale? It only has been used quite extensively in European, continental European, but it hasn't really been taken off in UK, let alone China and other non-European countries. There are about maybe 300 projects in the UK, about 1,000 units, 1,000 houses that reach the passive house standard, which is not a lot considering how many people we have here. So the questions and doubts I went into research the passive house is, firstly, is it actually comfortable living inside a passive house? Because it's a sealed box and the rumor says that you can't open windows. And the second question is, does it always perform to the predicted energy efficient standard? Because you can design a house to be very energy efficient, you have a figure that you predicted, but does it actually perform to that figure, no matter what? And third one is, does passive house need passive people? 被动房需要被动住户吗? It's also the title of my paper recently published. So, I want to understand what's the relationship between this building and the people who use it. Now, because I'm based in the UK and I'm interested in the passive house in the UK, so I started to look at the case studies in the UK, and I chose 10 case studies with 16 households in total. And I started a grounded research methodology. So those different buildings, as you can see at the bottom of the screen, the very small charts, they differ in their size, their building material. Sometimes they're multi-story, sometimes just one single story bungalow. Sometimes they are terraced houses or semi-detached houses. So they're quite different, and the occupation dates are, I chose to be no more than 3 years, so you haven't lived there for too long. And I use questionnaire surveys, interview with the occupants and site visit, and did architecture analysis as well to understand those questions. So to give you some simple answers here, I won't go on about my analysis process. The first question, is it comfortable living inside a passive house? And the answer is mostly. And if you ask people who live there, they would probably say, yeah, most of the time, yeah, it's very comfortable. But there is a risk of overheating in certain passive buildings, especially in southern part of England, where the winter is mild, but the summer can have higher temperature days. Especially with climate change, we'll have more and more weather extremes and heat waves. So that overheating passive buildings become a really a big problem. And secondly, the climate control within the house is not instant, and sometimes the occupants feel like this is not a good feature. So if you can't press a button like in an air conditioning and get instant heat or cool, they just don't feel like it's there. And thirdly, indoor air could be dry in certain cases because most of the time you need the constant operation of the ventilation system, which will just bring the moisture and air outside of your house. So those are design issues, I would say, rather than the standard itself. It partly depends on the architecture design, but more crucially, it requires a shift in the mindset about the concept of comfort. So we think about comfort as something we receive. We just sit here and let the radiator does does its thing. But actually, comfort can be an adaptive concept. So comfort can be achieved through our adaptations. This is not my concept. It's adaptive comfort has been in the research area since the 70s as a response to kind of climate change and high energy use. So what I observed in those occupants in passive house is they start to have a behavior adaptations to try to achieve comfort, and this is what I call comfort-driven behavior change. So those include change of clothing, change of bedding to have cooler clothes and thinner beddings. It sounds like very simple things. But most time people don't do it. We just wear t-shirts inside a 23-degree house in the winter. It also includes to open the windows intelligently to prevent overheating, like, operate the blinds and windows, get ventilation. And it was a myth that you can't open windows. Of course, you can open windows, but it depends on the scenario. And they need to learn to learned behavior to operate the mechanical ventilation system. And sometimes they change the layout of the house to have different focal points, that they don't sit around a wood burning stove, which is really hot. But it's necessary to provide the hot water. So for those who didn't try to make those adaptations, they put in extra heating or cooling devices, which increased the energy use just for their own convenience rather than adapting their behavior. The second question, does it always perform to the predicted energy efficiency standard? Well, no, because what I said about people putting in extra devices. So a performance gap has been recorded in some cases, and this is mainly due to the occupants not operating the house properly. So they don't try to learn and adapt their behavior to operate the house, operate a new technical system. They use extra appliances so that their energy use will be much higher than predicted. So what I found is those people who did try to adapt had a learning curve of the knowledge of passive house. So they have increased in knowledge and confidence to control. And this is sometimes by trying different things, by trial and error. Sometimes by reading manuals or from other self-built projects they learned from others. And most of the time, they are supported by professionals, housing associations, and their landlords. So before the housing association or the developer pass the house on to the occupants, they will tell them, what you need to do, how do you operate a house properly. And most interestingly, some multi-family houses, like in a community, this learning is supported by a community or supported by neighbors. They form a kind of an eco community to monitor each other, not monitor is not the right word, but to help each other to better control the building. And for people who didn't increase any knowledge in passive house, who just didn't know what to do, those are the people that are not supported by the housing association. So they were told, like the two residents here, they were told by the housing association to not touch anything, just to even not open the windows, to not touch any settings. And they felt terrible living there. There's no comfort, and their energy consumption, they were just confused by how much energy they consume. And they ended up using more energy than others. The third question, does passive house need passive people? Well, no, absolutely not, because of what we found out. Passive house needs active occupants to learn about the control system, to actively practice comfort, and to develop a new set of routines to operate the house to achieve its designed efficiency. And certain behavior change is needed to successfully achieve the benefit of passive house. So doing sustainable architecture, I slowly realized that as much as it's a technical problem, it's a social problem, because we work with people, and it's the people who needs to use those technology properly and to kind of want to adapt and want to change their behaviors. So I also recorded behavior adaptations that's based on energy saving driven behavior change. So not just to achieve comfort, but after they lived in the passive house, they wanted to save energy, like their mindset has changed. Because some people living in passive house, they didn't know passive house before. They are just a social tenant. They rent this house from a landlord. But after living in it, they decide that, wow, I can save so much energy. Why don't I try to save more? So they start to have adaptations purely to save energy, such as being patient on a slow response system. So not just to push buttons or adding other controls. They develop habit of checking the weather frequently to decide what they need to do, or being mindful of additional energy use. So not to carefully set a schedule to operate other equipment if needed. And they sometimes they have an energy data log, so they keep track of their energy use, in what time, in what date they use such energy. So continue to monitor it. And for a community of passive house residents, they formed community-based learning on energy efficiency. So learn from neighbors, and they start become an eco community, which is amazing achievement. So in summary, the slow response of passive house system, mechanical system requires a psychological adaptation and change of expectation to achieve comfort. And the majority of the occupants are both able and willing to adapt their behavior if facilitated with sufficient support. And rather than designing out the role of occupants, strategies should be put in place to explore, to embrace and facilitate the behavior adaptations of the occupants. And the passive house itself, as a low carbon design methodology, has potential to establish new social norms to achieve sustainable behavior change. And that's what I got from my research. And I know that more research is needed with the escalating climate change and the different future climate, and to really promote this low energy housing methodology to more places, to explore more avenues of how this can help with reducing energy use and carbon emission. Now, to end on a positive note, this building is a Goldsmiths Street in London. It has won the 2019 RIBA Sterling Prize, which is a very prestigious prize for architecture building. And this is a social housing development, and it comprises 93 units of passive house. So it's a symbol or a sign of passive house methodology start to being embraced by the mainstream building sector in the UK, which is a great news. So I'll end there. Thank you everyone for listening. And if you want to see more of my research, please go to my ResearchGate, or happy to do collaborations on any projects. And this is my email on the screen as well. So thank you.